He was a former Navy SEAL hiding from the echoes of war, searching for quiet in an autumn valley. But deep in the forest, he found something that shattered that peace. A police officer bound inside an abandoned red pickup, fear in her eyes, the woods closing in. Someone wanted her erased. The leaves hid the truth, and danger was already moving closer. Her survival depended on the one man who thought he'd left violence behind. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. Autumn had settled fully over Copper Hollow, a small mountain town tucked into the northern spine of the Rockies. The air carried the crisp scent of pine and cold stone, sharp enough to sting the lungs with every breath. Maple and aspen trees burned in shades of amber, rust, and deep crimson, their leaves drifting down like quiet embers onto winding roads and forest trails. In town, storefronts along Main Street were preparing for the annual Harvest Festival, unaware that something darker had begun to seep into the surrounding wilderness. 5 miles beyond the last streetlight, where pavement surrendered to dirt and leaf-choked paths, Elliot Kane lived alone in a weathered cabin overlooking a narrow valley. At 29, he was young for a man who carried himself with such controlled stillness. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean, athletic build shaped by years of relentless training, Elliot moved like someone who wasted no energy. His dark hair was kept short, his face clean-shaven, his features sharp but calm, handsome in a quiet, unassuming way. His eyes, a clear steel gray, rarely stopped scanning. He had been a Navy SEAL once. Now he was a man trying to forget what that had required of him. At his side padded Valor, a full-grown German shepherd with a powerful frame and a sable and black coat that blended easily into shadow. Valor's ears stood alert even when his gait was relaxed, and his intelligent amber eyes missed little. He was disciplined without being rigid, loyal without being reckless. A dog shaped by trust rather than command alone. Where Elliot watched the forest with experience, Valor read it through instinct. They walked the eastern trail that afternoon, boots and paws crunching softly through fallen leaves. The weather was clear but cool, a pale sun filtering through thinning clouds. Elliot carried no weapon in hand, only a compact flashlight clipped to his belt and a small toolkit in his jacket pocket. Old habits died hard, but he had learned not to live like he was still on patrol. Copper Hollow's people had been restless lately. Elliot had noticed it during his infrequent trips into town. Voices lowered in the general store, worried looks exchanged over coffee. Animals had been disappearing. A white-tailed deer, known to roam near the old mill, had vanished. Someone swore an eagle's nest high on the ridge had been found empty. Even fox sightings had dropped to nothing. The forest felt quieter than it should have in autumn. Earlier that morning, Elliot had stopped by a small hunting supply shack on the edge of town. The owner, an elderly man named Walter Briggs, had been restocking traps behind the counter. Walter was thin and bent with age, his face lined like cracked leather, his voice slow but sharp. "Strangers been coming through," Walter had said, glancing toward the window. "Buying traps in bulk, the heavy kind, not locals, didn't say where they were headed." That detail had lodged uncomfortably in Elliot's mind. The trail narrowed as Elliot and Valor descended into the valley. That was when Valor stopped, not abruptly, just enough to signal change. His head lifted, his body angled slightly left. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not quite a growl, but close. Elliot followed his gaze. 50 yards ahead, partially concealed by brush and fallen branches, sat a red pickup truck, old and sun-faded, its paint scratched and dulled by years of neglect. It didn't belong there. The trail wasn't meant for vehicles, and the ground beneath the tires was deeply rutted, as if the truck had been forced in under haste. Elliot's posture shifted instantly. Civilian calm slid aside, replaced by trained awareness. He approached slowly, placing each step with care. Valor stayed close, muscles taut but silent. As Elliot reached the driver's side, he noticed the door handle was bent, the lock scratched. The rear windows were clouded with dirt. Then he heard it. A muffled sound. Human. Desperate. Elliot moved to the passenger side and peered through the glass. Inside the cab, slumped awkwardly against the door, was a woman. Her wrists were bound behind her with rough cord, her ankles tied. A strip of fabric was knotted across her mouth. Her brown hair was tangled and damp with sweat, strands plastered to her pale face. Her eyes, wide, dark, and frantic, locked onto his. She shook violently, trying to scream through the gag. "Easy," Elliot whispered, more to himself than to her. She was wearing a police jacket, the fabric torn at the shoulder. A badge glinted weakly on her chest. Rowan Hale looked younger than he expected. Early 30s, maybe. Even exhausted and terrified, there was something resilient in her expression, a stubborn fire beneath the fear. Her build was lean and athletic, the kind earned through long shifts and discipline. She didn't collapse into panic when she saw him. She watched him, assessing, hoping. Elliot checked the surrounding trees first. Broken branches, scuffed earth, drag marks leading from deeper in the woods to the truck. Whoever had done this hadn't been careful. They'd been in a hurry. He slid a thin metal tool from his pocket and worked it gently into the passenger side lock. No sudden movements, no noise. The lock gave with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled stale and metallic. Valor circled the truck once, nose low, tracking scents Elliot couldn't see. Elliot cut the gag first, then the cords around Rowan's wrists. She gasped, sucking in air like she'd been underwater. "Police!" she rasped, voice raw. "I know," Elliot said quietly, cutting the rest of the bindings. "You're safe. For now." Her legs trembled as she tried to stand. Elliot caught her before she fell, steady but respectful. She was light, too light for someone clearly trained and fit. "I thought," she swallowed hard, "I thought no one would come." Valor sat directly in front of her, blocking her view of the forest. His presence was grounding. Rowan's breathing slowed as she focused on him. Elliot helped her out of the truck and guided her toward a fallen log. He crouched, scanning the tree line again. This wasn't a robbery. The bindings were deliberate. The location was deliberate. The truck was hidden, but not enough. Something else was happening in these woods. As the wind stirred the canopy above them, leaves whispered against one another, and Elliot felt it again. That same quiet wrongness he'd felt before missions went bad. The sense that the forest was watching, holding its breath. He didn't yet know who had done this or why, but he knew one thing with certainty. Copper Hollow was no longer just a quiet mountain town preparing for autumn festivities. Something had come into the valley, and it wasn't leaving on its own. Copper Hollow's forest closed in as evening crept across the valley. The air cooled quickly, carrying the smell of damp leaves and wood smoke from distant cabins. Elliot Kane guided Rowan Hale along a narrow spur trail that cut toward his property, keeping their pace steady and quiet. Valor moved ahead and behind in short arcs, a living perimeter, his paws soundless on the loam. The cabin sat low among pines, gray timber weathered smooth by years of snow and sun. A single window glowed faintly as dusk deepened. Elliot ushered Rowan inside and bolted the door with a practiced hand. Warmth wrapped the room. Pine resin, iron from the stove, and the clean tang of antiseptic. He set her on a sturdy chair near the hearth and knelt, rolling out a compact first aid kit. Rowan watched him with a mix of gratitude and guarded alertness. Up close, the strain showed, smudged dirt on her cheekbones, a split at the corner of her lip, wrists rubbed raw where rope had bitten. She was compact and strong, shoulders squared even while seated, posture drilled by long hours on patrol. Her eyes were sharp hazel, focused despite exhaustion. "Let me see your hands," Elliot said. His voice stayed even, low. He cleaned and dressed the abrasions, then checked her breathing and pupils. Valor settled at her feet, chin on his paws, gaze lifted toward her face. The steady presence eased her tremor. When the immediate work was done, Elliot poured water and set it within reach. Rowan took a careful sip, then another, and finally spoke. "They're called the Oak Ridge Syndicate," she said. The name carried weight. "On paper they don't exist. In practice they move wildlife, protected species, across state lines. Rare deer, raptors, foxes. They know the routes, the gaps. They use the forest like a warehouse." Elliot leaned back against the counter, listening without interrupting. The stove ticked softly as it cooled. "I was tracking a supply chain," Rowan continued. "Drop points, middlemen, transport. I got too close. Someone tipped them off." Her jaw tightened. "There's an insider in the department." The word insider settled like ash. Elliot's gaze drifted to the window, then returned. "You're sure?" "I don't say that lightly," she said. "Logs changed. Patrols diverted at the wrong times. Information that never leaves internal systems showed up in the hands of people who shouldn't have it." A low sound rumbled from Valor's chest. He rose and padded toward the front door, nose lifting. Elliot followed, hand on the latch but not opening it. Valor's ears pricked. He sniffed the seam beneath the threshold, then stepped back, eyes fixed on the porch. Elliot opened the door a fraction. On the top step lay a narrow wooden plank, freshly cut, its grain pale against the dark boards. Letters had been carved deep and rough, the grooves still clean. "Don't interfere. Next time there will be a body." The words were blunt, unadorned. Elliot closed the door and slid the deadbolt home. He set the plank on the table without comment. Rowan read it, her shoulders stiffening. "They followed us," she said. "Or they were already watching," Elliot replied. Silence stretched. The cabin felt smaller, the forest beyond pressing in. Elliot considered the phone on the wall, then turned it face down. He didn't reach for it. "If there's an insider," he said, "calling this in could make things worse." Rowan nodded once. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." Valor returned to his place by the door, settling with his back to the room, eyes trained outward. Elliot drew the curtains and checked the windows, testing each latch. He set the plank near the stove, where the light caught the carved threat. Rowan steadied her breath. "There's more," she said. "I overheard something I couldn't place at first. They're not just moving animals. They process them. Extracts, glands, oils, a stimulant. Herbal, they call it. But it's refined, concentrated." Elliot's jaw tightened. The word extract cut through him. Memory surged unbidden, heat shimmering off a desert road, the sour, sweet smell of chemicals, men wired on something that wasn't adrenaline alone. His hands curled, then relaxed. "I've seen versions of that," he said after a moment. "Different place, same effect." A flash of color streaked his vision. He blinked it away. The stove hissed. He focused on the mundane. Counting breaths, grounding himself in the room. Valor glanced back, then stood and pressed his shoulder briefly against Elliot's leg, a quiet anchor. Rowan noticed. "You okay?" "I will be," he said. "Tell me what you know." She did. Names without faces, times without dates, a pattern of night movements and unmarked vehicles, a forest that had learned to keep secrets. Elliot listened, sorting, filing, discarding nothing. Outside, the wind shifted. Needles brushed siding like fingers. Elliot moved to the window and cracked it a fraction. Nothing obvious. He closed it again and checked the rear door. "Stay here," he said to Rowan. "I'm going to make sure there's no one close." He stepped onto the porch with Valor at his heel. The dog circled once, nose down, then paused near the step. Elliot crouched, tracing faint scuffs in the dirt. Boot marks, shallow, recent. They led away, not toward the trees, but along the ridge, as if the messenger wanted the message seen and the trail obscured. Back inside, Elliot locked up and leaned against the door, exhaling slowly. He looked at Rowan, steady now, resolve reasserting itself despite fatigue. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not tonight, not while you're here." Rowan met his gaze. "I didn't ask you to." "Good," he said, "because I'd do it anyway." He laid out a plan that stayed simple. Lights low, fire banked, no calls. He showed Rowan where the spare blanket and water were, how to move without noise, where to stand if she had to. He kept his tone practical, not heroic. Valor took position near the hearth, eyes flicking between them and the door. As darkness settled fully over Copper Hollow, the forest went quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Elliot felt it in his bones, the same pressure he'd known elsewhere when waiting was worse than action. He rolled his shoulders, grounding himself again, and set a chair where he could see both doors. Rowan drew a breath and squared herself. "Whatever they think this is," she said, "they're wrong." Elliot nodded. The plank on the table caught the firelight, its carved letters stark and final. Outside, the wind carried the first cold edge of night, and the cabin held fast. Morning broke cool and clear, the forest washed in pale gold. A thin veil of mist hovered between the maples, their leaves aflame with reds and coppers that whispered underfoot. Elliot Kane moved with measured calm, backpack light, eyes scanning. Rowan Hale kept pace beside him, her steps careful but steady. Valor ranged ahead, nose low, tail level, reading the ground like a ledger written in scent. They reached the cut-in where the red pickup had been abandoned. Dew clung to the brush, tire ruts had softened but not vanished. Elliot knelt, studying the earth. Boot impressions overlapped the tracks. Multiple people, different weights, a hurried departure. Valor circled once, then angled away from the trail, pulling toward a narrow seam in the trees where the leaves were disturbed, pressed flat as if by repeated passage. The path dipped into a shallow ravine and climbed again, the canopy tightening. The smell changed. Old oil, metal, a bitter medicinal note that didn't belong to the woods. Valor slowed and stopped at a clearing half hidden by saplings. There, crouched against a stand of birch, sat a hunting camp that had been used hard and left fast. The cabin was little more than a shack, rotted boards, a roof patched with tar paper, a door hanging askew. Elliot approached first, listening. Nothing stirred. He nudged the door with his boot. It swung inward with a dry creak. Inside, the place told its story without words. Steel jaw traps lay stacked near the wall, cleaned but scarred. Coils of cable and snares hung from nails. A battered cooler held tranquilizer darts, the syringes labeled in marker with dosages. Rowan's breath hitched. "This isn't subsistence," she said quietly. "This is production." On a rough table sat a forest map, edges weighted by stones. Red grease pencil marks circled drainages, ridgelines, and service roads. Lines connected them in deliberate routes. Elliot traced one path with his finger. Clean, efficient, logistics, not chance. Pinned beneath the map was a folded note. Elliot opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, precise. At the bottom sat a signature that punched the air from Rowan's lungs. D. Sloan. Rowan stared, unmoving. The name carried a face with it. Lieutenant Derek Sloan, tall and polished, a man whose uniform always looked freshly pressed. Early 40s, square jaw, close-cropped hair already dusted with gray. Charismatic in briefings, generous with praise in public, exacting in private. He spoke often about protecting the town and had been the one to mentor her when she transferred in. The steadiness she'd trusted cracked all at once. Her knees gave. Elliot caught her before she fell and eased her onto a crate. Valor stepped closer, leaning his shoulder into her leg, grounding her with solid warmth. "I'm sorry," Elliot said, not softening the truth. "But this fits." Rowan pressed her palms to her eyes, breathing through the shock until anger edged in. "He knew my roots," she said. "He knew when I'd be alone." Elliot continued the sweep. In a corner, half hidden under burlap, he found a small wooden box. It was sealed with twine. He opened it and froze. Inside lay a fine white powder, chalky and odorless at first glance. He dipped a finger, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, then sniffed. A memory flared. Harsh sun, burning lungs, men who wouldn't stop coming. He closed the lid. "This isn't bait," he said. "It's a precursor." Rowan looked up. For what? Something synthetic, biological. It pushes the nervous system. He chose his words carefully. "I've seen it turn people into liabilities who think they're invincible." That detail reframed the room. The traps weren't just for animals. The routes weren't just for hides and feathers. This was multi-layered, a chain that started in the forest and ended far beyond it. Outside, a twig snapped. Elliot stilled. Valor lifted his head, ears forward. They waited. A breeze moved through the birches, nothing more. Elliot exhaled and continued, documenting silently with his eyes. Near the door, he found scuffed boot marks pointing north, toward a service road marked on the map. He memorized the pattern. Rowan stood, steadier now, anger sharpening her focus. "They thought they wiped it clean," she said. "They didn't." Elliot folded the map and note, tucking them away. He left the traps where they lay. Moving evidence here would only advertise their presence. Valor paced once, then returned to the threshold, gaze fixed on the trees. As they stepped back into the clearing, the forest seemed to lean closer. The sun had climbed, warming the leaves, but the air felt colder all the same. Elliot took one last look at the shack. Rotes, tools, signatures, and locked the picture in his mind. On the hike back, they spoke little. Rowan's shock hardened into resolve. Elliot's thoughts ran quiet and fast, aligning threats and timelines. Valor led, confident again, the ledger of scent closing behind them. At the ridge, Elliot paused. He looked back toward the ravine, then to Rowan. "We're dealing with more than poachers." Rowan nodded. "And fewer people than we thought." They turned toward the trees, the maples shedding leaves like secrets, the truth now sharp enough to cut. Night fell hard over Copper Hollow. The forest that had glowed all day in copper and scarlet now burned in deeper shades. The maples lit from below by moonlight and the cabin's single lamp. Wind threaded through branches, carrying the dry whisper of leaves and a colder edge that hinted at frost by dawn. Elliot Kane dimmed the interior light and let the stove go low. Valor lay near the hearth, head lifted, body coiled with intent. The warning came as a vibration more than a sound. Valor's chest released a low, sustained rumble, his ears pivoting toward the tree line. Elliot felt it in his spine before he heard anything else. The pressure, the timing, the certainty that someone was testing the dark. He moved without hurry. A loop of thin wire came from a drawer, then a handful of empty tins and a length of cord. He slipped outside, boots silent on the porch, and strung the first alarm between two saplings. Cans hung loose to chatter at the lightest touch. Another line followed, then a third, staggered and angled to fracture approach lanes. It wasn't a trap meant to wound. It was a map drawn in sound. Inside, Rowan Hale stood near the back wall, jacket tight around her shoulders, eyes steady. She had changed from shock to readiness, the way she always did when the line closed in. Elliot met her gaze once and nodded. She understood where to stand, where not to move. Valor shifted closer to her calf, a living shield. The forest answered the setup with a crackle, metal on metal. Then another, farther right. The cans sang, shadows broke from the trees, shapes separating and rejoining as they moved. Elliot counted silently. 4, maybe 5. He waited for the mistake. It came fast. A boot snapped a branch. Elliot stepped out from the porch's shadow and fired once. Not at flesh, but into the trunk just above a head. Wood exploded. The message was clear. The response was immediate. Muzzle flashes flickered among the maples, brief and frantic. The forest lit up in stuttering white, leaves glowing as if aflame. The noise punched memory into Elliot's skull. Heat, dust, a concussive wave that stole breath. His hands tightened, then shook. He forced air in through his nose, out through his mouth, counting. Valor's shoulder pressed against his thigh, grounding him. Rowan's voice cut through, calm and close. "Elliot, here, with me." The tremor eased enough to move. He slipped left, staying low, and kicked over a stack of split logs. They fell with a thunder that drew fire away from the cabin. A man broke from cover, sprinting for the back door. He was lean and quick, bundled in dark layers, face shadowed by a hood. Valor launched before Elliot could speak. The shepherd hit him at the waist, not biting, just driving with pure mass. The man went down hard, breath knocked from him. Valor held him there, teeth bared inches from the throat, eyes blazing. Rowan moved in a blur, yanking the door shut and bracing it as another shape slammed in two. The siding. Elliot was on the grounded attacker in 2 steps. He twisted an arm, found the wrist, and leveraged pain into compliance. Zip ties snapped tight. The man hissed and cursed, then went still when Valor's growl deepened. He was young, mid-20s, with a sharp nose and a faint scar along his jaw. Sweat plastered dark hair to his forehead. His eyes darted, calculating. Elliot hauled him to the porch light and set him down. "Talk," Elliot said. No threat, no rush. The man swallowed. "We weren't supposed to fight," he blurted. "Just scare you off." "Who sent you?" A pause. Fear flickered. "Sloan," he said. "Lieutenant Sloan. He clears routes, keeps patrols thin. We pay him to look the other way." Gunfire sputtered and then stopped. The remaining shadows melted back into the trees, retreating when they realized surprise was gone and the cabin wasn't soft. Leaves rustled, then nothing. The forest closed again, holding its breath. Elliot dragged the prisoner inside and set him on a chair, hands secured, ankle looped to a post. He checked the windows, the lines, the dark. Only then did he let himself lean against the wall. His pulse hammered, the echo of blasts still ringing. Rowan crossed to him and placed a steady hand on his forearm. "You did it?" she said quietly. "Stay here with me." He nodded, focusing on her eyes until the world steadied. The captive slumped, bravado gone. Up close he looked smaller. "They said you were alone," he muttered. "That you'd run." Elliot said nothing. Minutes passed. The wind shifted. Valor returned to Rowan's side and sat, posture proud, chest still heaving. She knelt and pressed her forehead to his, whispering thanks. The dog's tail thumped once. Outside, the maples stood scarlet and black, leaves drifting like sparks to the ground. The night had tested the cabin and found it costly. Elliot straightened and met Rowan's gaze. The truth had teeth now. Names, admissions, a line drawn in the dark. The syndicate had backed off, but not surrendered. He tightened the last knot and looked to the door, listening. Copper Hollow slept on, unaware that its quiet had just been defended by fire and restraint. Dawn came quietly to Copper Hollow, a thin band of gold lifting over the ridgeline and spilling across the lake. Mist drifted like breath over the water, turning the shoreline into a soft blur. The abandoned lumber warehouse sat back from the road, gray boards bowed and weathered, its wide doors chained but not locked. An invitation dressed as neglect. Elliot Kane lay prone on a rise above the yard, the ground cool beneath his palms. He wore neutral layers that swallowed light, his posture relaxed but ready. Nearby, Agent Mason Reed watched the perimeter through binoculars. Reed was mid-30s, lean and compact, with close-cropped hair and a face that seemed carved from angles and patience. He spoke little, moved precisely, and carried the calm confidence of someone who trusted preparation over luck. Federal credentials had brought him here, but it was discipline that kept him steady. Rowan Hale waited near the tree line with Valor at her heel. She stood straight despite the ache that lingered in her shoulders, eyes fixed on the warehouse yard. The first rays of sun warmed the water behind them, turning the lake to hammered gold. Valor's nose worked the breeze tail level, tracking the faint medicinal scent that clung to the air. Tranquilizer compounds unique to the syndicate's operation. Engines murmured. 2 vehicles rolled in without headlights, tires crunching gravel. Men stepped out in practiced silence. At their center walked Grant Mercer, the man who had turned forests into supply chains. Mercer was tall and spare, his coat tailored and clean, hair silvered at the temples. His eyes were cold and measuring, a strategist's gaze that valued margins and outcomes. He surveyed the yard with the casual ownership of someone used to obedience. A third figure emerged from the passenger seat of the second vehicle. Lieutenant Derek Sloan adjusted his jacket, the badge on his belt catching the early light. He looked polished even here, jaw set, posture upright, confidence worn like armor. His eyes flicked to Mercer, then to the warehouse, calculating. Elliot's breath slowed. He waited. Valor's ears pivoted. He angled forward, scent sharp now, pulling Rowan one step closer to the trees. Reed murmured into his mic. The plan tightened like a knot. Mercer lifted a hand. A man peeled off toward the warehouse door. Reed raised 2 fingers. Elliot shifted his weight, a signal unseen from below. Then Sloan moved. He seized a worker by the collar, a young man with fear already written across his face, and dragged him in front, pistol up. The worker's hands shook. Sloan's voice cut the air. "Back away," he shouted, "or he bleeds." Time compressed. Elliot's vision narrowed, sound thinning to a distant rush. A memory tried to break through, another hostage, another wrong choice. But it stalled when Valor surged. The shepherd launched downhill, a black and sable arc against the light. He did not bite. He hit Sloan at the hip with his full weight, driving him off balance and away from the hostage. The worker stumbled free and ran, falling hard but moving. Sloan swung the pistol toward Valor. A crack split the morning. Elliot's single shot clipped the weapon from Sloan's hand, spinning it into the gravel. Reed and his team poured in, voices sharp and clear, commands stacking fast. Mercer turned to flee and ran straight into a wall of agents. Sloan scrambled, rage twisting his face, but Elliot was already there. He closed the distance, controlled the arm, and put Sloan on the ground with clean, efficient pressure. Steel clicked. Cuffs locked. The yard filled with movement, then stilled. Mercer stood pinned, jaw clenched, eyes flat. Valor returned to Rowan's side, chest heaving, eyes bright and focused. Rowan dropped to one knee and pressed her forehead to his, a breathless laugh breaking free. Sunlight flooded the yard. The lake beyond glittered, indifferent and beautiful. An agent hauled a man from the shadows. He was gaunt, trembling, words tumbling out as soon as he saw Sloan on the ground. "He ordered it," the man babbled. "The hit. Said she was too close." Rowan closed her eyes once, absorbing it, then opened them. The truth had found daylight. 3 months later, the federal courtroom hummed with restrained energy. Rowan stood straight as charges were read, her uniform crisp again, evidence stacked high. Maps, compounds, routes, testimony built a structure that did not sway. The sentences fell with weight and clarity. Derek Sloan received 40 years for corruption, conspiracy with armed criminals, and attempted murder of a police officer. His composure fractured when the gavel struck. Grant Mercer was sentenced to life without parole for trafficking protected wildlife, manufacturing biological narcotics, kidnapping, and conspiracy to kill. He stared ahead, unmoving. 5 others received 15 to 25 years, the numbers matching the damage they'd helped cause. Autumn returned to Copper Hollow softer than before. The town gathered near the ranger station as a small bronze plaque was unveiled beside a modest statue, a German shepherd in profile, ears forward, watchful. Valor sat at its base, head tilted, as applause rippled like leaves in wind. Rowan accepted a commendation for valor, her name spoken clear and proud. Elliot watched from the edge of the crowd. When Rowan found him, she smiled. Not the tight smile of survival, but something warmer. "You staying?" she asked. He looked at the lake, the hills, the quiet. The echoes that once chased him had thinned, replaced by purpose. "Yeah," he said, "I think I am." The sun dipped, gilding the water once more. Copper Hollow breathed easier. Justice had a place here now, and so did they. Sometimes life feels like a quiet town on the surface, while unseen battles rage just beyond the tree line. This story reminds us that courage isn't always loud, and justice doesn't always arrive quickly. But it does arrive when ordinary people choose to stand firm, protect one another, and refuse to look away. In our daily lives, we may never face the dangers of a forest ambush or a criminal syndicate, but we all face moments where doing the right thing is harder than staying silent. Strength is found in loyalty, healing is found in connection, and hope is built when we decide that fear will not have the final word. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone who stood up when it mattered most, please share it with others. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. And for more stories of courage, loyalty, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, subscribe to the channel and join our community. Because sometimes one brave choice can change an entire valley, and sometimes it can change a life.